I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Today on ABC News Live, new details on President Trump's alleged actions in the days leading up to the Capitol insurrection. The January 6th committee has released new evidence about the former president and his inner circle. How the committee says extremist groups responded to his calls for a rally in Washington and its new warning to the former president. Also ahead, President Biden has landed in Israel on the first leg of his high-stakes Middle East tour. What the president says about his goals in the region ahead of his planned trip to Saudi Arabia and meeting with the Crown Prince. And the release of surveillance video from inside Robb Elementary School on the day of that deadly school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. What the footage shows about the police response and the outrage from families and local officials. But we begin with the January 6th committee releasing new evidence about the former president Trump's actions leading up to the Capitol attack and how extremist groups responded to his calls for a rally in Washington. Lawmakers are now pointing to a Trump tweet drafted days before the insurrection to summon the crowd to the Capitol. We also heard testimony for the first time from Trump's former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. Among other things, he detailed an intense clash in the Oval Office over what he says were proposals to seize voting machines and overturn the election. And the committee's vice chair, Liz Cheney, suggested Trump tried to influence a witness who had yet to testify, referring the incident to the Justice Department. Investigative reporter Catherine Falders joins me live now for more on all of this. Catherine, the committee showed that draft tweet from former President Trump that appears to show he planned to march to the Capitol ahead of time. How significant is that?
Yeah, the committee showed that tweet, which was from 2 days prior, the 4th of January, along with text message communications between rally organizers and some Trump allies. It's significant because it's the first piece of evidence that the committee has shown that makes that direct tie between those rally organizers. You see that tweet on the screen there, between the rally organizers and the White House and Trump himself. Important about that tweet is that he says, please arrive early, massive crowds expected, march to the Capitol after. The tweet was never sent, but it shows that there was this intention for Trump to have his supporters march to the Capitol. There was that text message exchange also between the organizers that essentially detailed this setup, that they were going to have a separate stage, a second stage outside of the Supreme Court, and that the president was just going to unexpectedly announce, you see it there, unexpectedly call for his supporters to go to the Capitol. All of this shows this plan, this broader plot that shows the involvement of the White House and Trump and the rally organizers.
Now, Congresswoman Cheney also says that Trump tried to call a witness who hasn't publicly testified yet, that it was reported to the Justice Department. How serious is this accusation of witness tampering? Because it's also not the first.
It depends exactly what was said here. We know that a witness was called by Trump, that the call was missed. There's lots of unanswered questions. Was there a voicemail? Did Trump get in touch with other witnesses, for example? But the committee will say that this is important for the Justice Department to know. And I talked to Jamie Raskin, a member of the committee, after this hearing, who said that this is just part of this broader plot, in a way, to show witness tampering. You saw from the hearing with Cassidy Hutchinson how Cheney displayed those messages that we learned were sent to Hutchinson, attempting to potentially influence her testimony. So Raskin and the committee says this is part of this effort that they're seeing from Trump and his allies to attempt to get in touch with witnesses and potentially attempt to influence their testimony.
Now, the panel initially billed Tuesday's hearing as one that would underscore ties between far-right extremist groups and those in Trump's orbit. Now, they did note ties to Republican operative Roger Stone and former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, but no evidence so far that Trump himself had contacts with far-right groups or was aware of what they were planning before January 6th. How crucial is that?
That's the question, and they've kind of laid the groundwork for this in a way. You remember from Cassidy Hutchinson saying that when Rudy Giuliani was in the White House, she heard him talk about these groups. You saw yesterday, as you mentioned, the ties to Michael Flynn and Roger Stone, then getting closer and closer to the White House. But, Diane, that question remains. Was there knowledge from Trump that these groups were involved? Now, they would show and say in their evidence yesterday that Trump knew that some of his tweets that he was sending out out. The be there, it's going to be wild was a specific call for his supporters to come to Washington. You heard that from some of the rioters yesterday, but that is where they need to connect the dots, potentially a little bit more. But it's important to point out that in the separate investigation going on in the Justice Department, that they have focused in on these groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. They have interviewed many of these rioters. You've seen plenty have been charged with seditious conspiracy, so they have really narrowed in on this.
Now, the committee is expected to hold its final hearing in prime time next Thursday. So what do they need to know, or what do they need to do, rather, to really create a lasting impact here?
So the main question here, and part of the themes of a lot of these hearings, was that 187 minutes where Trump was absent in the Oval Office the day of January 6th, questions that still need to be answered from whether it's witness testimony or evidence is what was Trump doing at that time? We heard from testimony that Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff, was just sitting on his cell phone, that Trump wanted to be by himself in the Oval Office watching television, as we reported at the time. Who was he calling? We've seen the White House call logs. Those are the official White House call logs from the switchboard. Whose cell phones was he using? Who was he in touch with? All of those questions obviously need to be answered, and that's what the committee will focus on now. But I will say that Chairman Thompson did say yesterday that this is their final hearing for now, but their work still continues. They're getting more evidence, so there could be potentially more hearings added.
All right, Catherine Falders, thank you for that. And President Biden is in Israel, kicking off his first trip to the Middle East since taking office. The president addressed the Israeli president and prime minister on arrival, talking about reaffirming the relationship between Israel and the United States, then quickly got to business with a defense briefing right there at the airport. Our deputy political director, Avery Harper, joins me live now from Jerusalem for more on this. Avery, I know the president just finished laying a wreath at the Holocaust Museum there in Jerusalem. What's President Biden's overall goal for this trip?
Right. Well, I'll first talk about him laying that wreath at the Holocaust Memorial. President Biden has always said that it is important to honor and pay respects to the victims of the Holocaust, and also learn from the survivors of the most heinous crime of the last century, he has said. He's there along with Secretary of State Tony Blinken. His stepfather is a survivor of Auschwitz, and so it's a very important visit that he is paying to that Holocaust Memorial. Overall, the goal of this trip is really to reaffirm the support that the U.S. has given to Israel, and also to deepen relationships between Israel and other nations in the region. He says it is an important thing to do because of security, combating Iran's nuclear program. It's also about limiting and combating the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine and competing with China. So there's lots of different things that the president is going to be doing here, lots of folks he's going to be talking to, but those are the main goals.
Now, Avery, Biden just participated in this wreath-laying ceremony. How significant is this moment, given all that they talked about in the speech this morning in terms of reaffirming the relationship, but also President Biden calling himself a Zionist?
Right. President Biden also said that he wants to combat and anti-Semitism in the U.S. and abroad. And so going to the Holocaust Museum, going to the Holocaust Memorial and paying respects to folks who were victims of Auschwitz and of the Holocaust, going and paying respects, honoring the victims, and trying to learn from those survivors is still something that's very important. President Biden has extensive experience in Israel. He has met with every Israeli prime minister for the past 48 years. And so he knows that it's important to invest in that relationship, and it's something that he's going to continue to do, including with this trip.
Now, the president has received a lot of criticism for this planned meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. The fiancée of murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi said that she was very disappointed that the president would meet with Mohammed bin Salman, who the U.S. determined ordered the operation that killed Khashoggi in 2018. So what's Biden hoping to get out of this meeting that makes this worth it?
Right. President Biden has spoken about Saudi Arabia as a strategic partner in the region. He is not shirking away from the notion of the human rights abuses that the Saudis have committed. You mentioned the killing of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, but he also understands the importance of having a strategic partner in the region to combat the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine, namely oil. Namely those energy resources. President Biden spoke just in his Washington Post column on Sunday about the fact that those energy resources are vital as they look to limit the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine and the not purchasing oil from Russia. And so that's something that we're going to continue to talk about. That's a topic of discussion, but that's not the only one that we know that he is going to talk about. He said that he is not going to ask the Saudis directly to increase oil production, that's going to be a general topic of discussion. But it's important to know that there is no silver bullet, experts say, that Saudi Arabia has to lower gas prices. Gas prices are falling, but still remain high at home. But it is something that the Biden administration can point to as a win and try to spin a win out of this trip.
All right, Avery Harper in Jerusalem for you. Thank you. And Akron, Ohio is recognizing a citywide day of mourning in honor of the funeral for Jayland Walker. Walker was shot and killed by police after speeding off from a traffic stop. Police say he fired a shot from the car as they pursued him and then left the car and tried to run. Body camera video shows multiple officers firing at him when they say Walker appeared to turn toward them. The preliminary medical report showed more than 60 wounds on his body. And police say they found a gun in the car, but that Walker, when he was shot, was unarmed. His death prompted weeks of protests across the city. Officials are now calling for peaceful protests and healing throughout the community. Officers involved in that shooting are on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. And I want to bring in ABC's Mola Lenghi for more on this. Mola, what can we expect from this day of mourning in Akron? What are they hoping will come of this?
Well, I think first and foremost, they're hoping for peace. They're hoping for calm. They're hoping for a bit of quiet and some reflection with regards to Jayland Walker's life. As you mentioned, a citywide mourning has been put in place. The city council voted that in earlier this week in the hopes of, again, having the community reflect especially after weeks and weeks of protests here. The funeral happening about a block away behind me there in the Civic Theater, open to the public, not open to media cameras. The family trying to keep some semblance of privacy, but they have opened up the funeral to the public, and the city obviously also involved in some of the logistics and the planning. So a relatively big turnout is expected, and it's pretty fitting considering the shooting has been a very public spectacle. The aftermath of this incident has been a very public spectacle, making national headlines. And so the family feeling the need to open up the doors to the public and welcome them in. Again, after weeks and weeks of protests and demonstrations in these city streets, demonstrations that will likely continue over the next few days and few weeks.
Now, the family has called a lot into question about claims from police. They say Jayland was a peaceful person, had no criminal record. They find it hard to believe that he owned a gun. So what's the latest on that, and what's the key message the family's trying to get out on this day that's dedicated to mourning his death and celebrating his life?
Yeah, still a lot of questions from the family, from members of the community. They have been pushing the messaging of who Jayland was, what kind of personality he was, what kind of background he was, what kind of guy he was. And we're hearing a lot of those same things that you just mentioned, that he was a nonviolent person, that he was a peaceful person, that nobody would have expected these sort of things from him, that he didn't have a criminal record, that this was completely out of character. Out of character is a phrase that we've heard the family often say here over the last few weeks. But at this point, it's just a lot of questions. Why this happened, how it happened, and more than anything else, the family is asking why police felt the need to fire as many shots as they did when shooting at Jayland Walker.
So, Mola, what's next for this investigation and for those officers now on leave?
Yeah, those 8 officers are still on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation into the incident, that investigation being handled out of agency by a separate agency, an independent agency. That's the Ohio Bureau of Investigation under the supervision of the Attorney General. And so that is going to be a very thorough, meticulous investigation, asking every single officer exactly what happened, how they saw and how they perceived Jayland Walker to be a threat. Police chief saying about a week ago that each officer has to account for every single bullet that he fired in that shooting a few weeks ago. So we are expecting that investigation, hopefully sometime over the next few days or few weeks, to try to shed some light exactly on what happened and if these officers will be held to account in any way.
All right, Mola Lange in Akron, Ohio for us. Thank you. And outrage is growing in Uvalde, Texas, after surveillance video of the Robb Elementary School mass shooting was leaked. It shows the gunman crash the car he was driving, then enter the school. You hear the rapid fire of bullets and then see more and more law enforcement officers gather in the hallway, but they don't enter the classroom for more than an hour, even after more gunshots are heard. Officials said parts of that video would have been shown to the families this weekend, but our ABC affiliate, KVUE, and the Austin American-Statesman obtained it and published it yesterday, quote, to provide transparency to the community. Senior investigative reporter Aaron Katursky joins me live now for more on this. Aaron, officials there are saying that this surveillance video was supposed to be released to the victims' families first. So what more do we know about how it was leaked and why?
Well, that was the plan, to give it to the families, allow them to see it in private before it was displayed for the public. And that may have lessened the shock of just having it published by a newspaper and a television station. We don't know how our partners at KVUE and the Austin American-Statesman ended up obtaining it, but they published edited excerpts and then posted the whole 122-minute video online for everyone to see. And they did it, as you said, Diane, in the name of transparency, because transparency has seemingly been lacking. A number of officials have declined to answer extensive questions about what went on at Robb Elementary School. There still has not been an official investigative report. We know lawmakers are working on it and expect to release it publicly sometime by the end of this month, perhaps as soon as next week. And that potentially could go a long way. We've heard what went on in the hallway. Now we simply see for ourselves the agonizing moments where officers are there, where heavy weapons are there, where ballistic shields are there, and still the officers do not confront the shooter.
Aaron, does this change the investigation in any way, having the public now see this video?
Well, it may increase the demand for official answers to see whether lawmakers are willing to try and hold law enforcement officers accountable for their actions. We still haven't heard publicly from the on-scene incident commander, Pete Arredondo of the Uvalde School Police Department. He has resigned his post as a city councilman, but remains, as far as we know, on the job. And the superintendent is another official who has declined to answer substantive questions. And now the public can see for itself what happened, who was in there, and then the questions will be, what were they thinking? From whom were they taking direction? Was there any thought about going in? You do see officers in those initial moments running toward the classroom, but backing away when it became clear that they thought they were being fired upon with a semi-automatic rifle.
Now, the sheriff also testified this week. What do we know about that?
Well, the sheriff is one of those who may have had a phone call or something about the incident. Did he properly respond? Were his deputies properly informed? This really does go, Diane, to a question of command and control of communication. Were radios working? Were radios present? We hear the officers chatting in the hallway. Were they communicating what they were hearing to the commanders on the outside of the school? But it's just mind-boggling. There was one point well into the massacre where somebody with a ballistic vest goes over to sanitize his hands, and still children were there in the classroom with the gunman.
All right, Aaron Katursky, it's a chilling video to watch in a story that's chilling all the way through. We appreciate you staying on top of it for us. Thank you. Coming up, the dominant new Omicron variant is spreading quickly around the country, and whether a second booster shot could eventually be available to all Americans. Stay with us. Welcome back. The highly transmissible Omicron subvariant BA.5 now accounts for nearly 2/3 of all of new COVID cases in the country. COVID hospitalizations are now at their highest level since March, with nearly 40,000 people being treated. So I want to bring in ABC News medical contributor and emergency physician Dr. Darian Sutton for more on this. Dr. Sutton, more people are in the hospital not because this strain is more severe, but just because it's so contagious, right? More people are getting infected. So what do we know about these hospitalized patients in terms of their vaccination status? Are they vaccinated, boosted, unvaccinated?
You know, I can speak from my anecdotal experience clinically treating patients in Los Angeles, where unfortunately we're seeing a surge, as well as here in New York and then in Central America and North Dakota, in the central United States and North Dakota, as well as Arkansas. We're seeing rates above 30% case rate increases. And for the most part, a lot of these patients, unfortunately, are vaccinated just because the large percentage of the population is. In my anecdotal experience, less likely for those who are boosted, which is what to be expected, because boosters, although this Omicron variant, the new subvariant BA.5, is proving to be more evasive, there is still protection as our vaccines keep us out of the hospital and protect us from death. But these numbers are becoming harder and harder to track because more people are using home testing, which again is a good sign because that means that people are able to treat their symptoms at home. But yes, as you said, the total number is the issue, which leads to hospitals overcrowding.
Now, the Biden administration is now discussing expanding a second booster shot to all Americans. What's your take on that? What are the pros and cons there?
I think it's going to be a really big, difficult time to try to communicate the benefits of that to a population. And the reason why is because we're hearing that this new variant, the BA.4 and BA.5 variant, are being successful at evading the immune system. But many people are going to say, then should I just wait for the future vaccines, which might be more specific? And I have to say that those are not yet available. So what we have to do now is use what we have to protect us the best. And I think of this kind of like a rainy day. And if when you look at these numbers, you want to think about it as raining heavy outside. And so with that being said, you want to protect yourself. You have your vaccines that protect you from hospitalization and death. You get your booster to add to that protection. You wear your mask and you distance yourself in crowded situations. And overall, that is what your goal is, to decrease your risk as much as possible.
All right, Dr. Darian Sutton, always great to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Coming up, Twitter is suing Elon Musk. We'll tell you why when we come back. Welcome back to ABC News Live. The latest Consumer Price Index report shows inflation up 1.3% in June. Prices are up 9.1% over the past year, the highest in 4 decades. The Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 are all down following that report's release. 2 people, including a 7-year-old, are dead after a boat capsized in the Hudson River in New York City. Police say at least 14 people were crowded in the boat when it overturned. They say the current and the wind may have been a factor. And Twitter is following through on its threat and suing Elon Musk. The move is an attempt to force him to follow through with his deal to buy the platform for $44 billion. Musk pulled out of the deal, claiming the company withheld data about fake accounts. I'm Diane Macedo. Stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis right after this.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.